Hello, I'm Greg, and this is the 15th video in my series on how to make a 3D space shooter game in Unity. In this video, we're adding music and sound effects. We're adding an EnemyShipManager to spawn enemy ships, and best of all, we're giving the enemy ships AI weapons control so they can follow around and chase and shoot back at the player. So grab your favorite beverage, pull up a chair, and follow along as I teach you how to write a 3D space shooter game in Unity. So in the last video, we added the UI for the player ship's weapons. So we now see how many missiles the player has. We see how many reloads he has for the missiles. We show the blaster capacitor. So the next thing we want to do is, I actually want to add a ton of content in this video, so I'm probably going to go pretty fast. But I want to add music and sound effects. I want to add enemy AI for shooting back at the player. That's going to get really interesting. But I need to do quite a bit of infrastructure work to get all of this working. So the first thing I want to do is I want to come up here to this managers node. And right now we only have a game manager, a camera manager, and a UI manager. We want to add a few more managers. So first of all, I'm going to add a music manager. So I will right click, create empty, music manager, and then I'm going to right click, create empty, sound manager. And finally, right-click, create empty, EnemyShipManager. So it's pretty self-explanatory. The music manager is going to handle playing music. The sound manager is going to handle sound effects. And the EnemyShipManager is what's going to spawn our enemy ships and make sure that there are enemies to come after the player. Now we want to create scripts for all of these as well, so we'll go into our scripts folder, managers. We'll right click here and create C# script. We'll start with the EnemyShipManager. Right click, create C# script, and music manager. And right click, create C# script. I'm getting ahead of Unity. Can't keep up with me. Sound manager. And I'm going to go ahead as soon as Unity finishes doing its compilation. I'm going to drag those on to those corresponding objects. So we have our enemy ship manager. We have our music manager. And we have our sound. Did I drag the wrong one on there? Nope. And now we have our sound manager. Okay. Now, one other thing I want to do, we're going to be referencing things that need to be instantiated in a certain order. So if I come in here to edit project settings, and you see there's a script execution order, we're going to want to add a few more things here. So we currently have our camera manager, health bar, UI manager, and so forth. We're definitely going to want to add just our top level managers node here. And then after that, we're going to want our music manager. After that, we're going to want our sound manager. Oops. Sound manager. Oh, we want our game manager. And I'm going to move these up in the hierarchy here. So managers, music manager, sound manager, game manager. Now the camera manager, health bar, UI manager. I think I want to add our blasters to this as well. I'll go ahead and move that above the missile UI. And I think I'm going to move the enemy ship manager up above the game manager. I'm going to hit apply. And the reason I'm doing this is I want to avoid possible null reference exceptions. A lot of these are going to implement the singleton pattern, and it's possible I will try to access them before the instance is instantiated if I don't make sure that they run in the proper order. Now let's go ahead and implement the singleton pattern. I'm going to go ahead and add the singleton pattern to our GameManager. It currently doesn't have it. So I'm going to say public static instance, actually GameManager instance. Be nice if I spelled public correctly. And we're going to add an awake method since we don't have one. Get rid of these comments. I'm going to zoom in a little bit more for your benefit. Awake, we will simply say, and this is the typical singleton pattern, if instance is not equal to null, an instance is not equal to this, destroy game object and return. Otherwise, we're going to use this instance. We're going to save this off to instance. And the reason I'm doing this is I'm going to be adding a public method to this guy that I need to call to tell the GameManager whether or not we are in combat mode, so that it can tell the MusicManager whether or not to play patrol music or combat music. So I might just go ahead and write that function. It's a really simple function. I guess I'll go ahead and do that. So I will say public void in combat. It will take a Boolean in combat. And if in combat is true, then we want to tell the MusicManager instance, which doesn't exist yet, to play combat music. And that also doesn't exist yet. Otherwise, we're going to tell the MusicManager to play patrol music. So I guess it would make sense to go ahead and do the MusicManager next. So let's come back into here. We have our MusicManager. Double click this. Zoom in. Delete all this boilerplate code. And I know I'm going fast, but like I said, I have a ton of material I want to try and get into this video. So I know I'm going to want the audio namespace. And we're going to implement the singleton pattern. Public static MusicManager instance. And in the awake method, you guessed it, if instance is not equal to null and instance is not equal to this, destroy game object and return instance equals this. Typical boilerplate singleton pattern. Let's add our serialized fields. We're going to want, now this is something new for y'all, we're going to want an audio mixer snapshot. So we can use audio mixer snapshots so we can have one for patrol volume levels, including the patrol music, and we can have one for combat volume levels, including combat music. And the snapshot has a really nice feature called transition to, so we can transition from the patrol snapshot to the combat snapshot, and it will do a really nice crossfade for us. So we have combat music playing, and then we destroy the last enemy ship. We transition over to the patrol snapshot, and it does a nice smooth crossfade to the patrol music. And you get all that for free. So I'm going to create two snapshot variables here. Patrol music snapshot. I'm just going to patrol snapshot. Patrol snapshot and combat snapshot. I'll make that lowercase. Now we need some audio clips to play. So I'm going to create an array of audio clips. We're going to have patrol music. And we're going to have combat music. And we need actually a couple of audio sources. So audio source, we'll have patrol audio source, combat audio source. And I'm going to create a private variable here, patrol music index and combat music index. These will be the indexers into these two arrays here. All right. So we want to have two public functions, which you've already seen from our GameManager, play combat music and play patrol music. I'm just going to right click, Alt-Enter, create method. Now the keystroke will be different for that if you're using Visual Studio. I'm using Rider. I believe in Visual Studio you can just right click and do this. I'm doing Alt-Enter, create method. Okay, so we'll do the patrol music first. First of all, if we have any patrol music playing on the audio source, we're just going to call stop on it. We're going to want to assign the patrol music clip. So say audio source.clip equals patrol music, and we're going to use the indexer patrol music index. We're going to tell it to play. And then, this is the cool part, patrol snapshot transition 2 over 1 second. That'll do our nice smooth crossfade. And the only thing remaining is to increment our index. So patrol music index. I'm going to use a modulo operator. If you're not familiar with the modulo operator, it's basically going to wrap around to 0 when we get past the end of the array. So we're going to say patrol music index plus 1 modulo patrol music dot length. So that is the modulo operator. So if we go past the length, it's just going to go back to 0 again. I'm going to copy all this and I'm going to paste it into here. And then we're just going to change all these to combat. What did it do? Okay, that's all I wanted. Combat. Change this to combat. Change this to combat. I'll just copy and paste this. Copy and paste this. All right. That should do it for the MusicManager. So let's switch over to the Unity editor. And we look at this, we need to assign a few things. We need to create an audio mixer and an audio mixer group, and we need to create our snapshots. We also need our music clips for our patrol music and combat music, and we're also going to need to create some audio sources. Let's do the audio mixer first. I'm going to drag this up a little bit to give me some room down here. I'm going to come up to Window, Audio Mixer, and it opened it here, but I'm going to drag it down to here. I'm going to create a new mixer, and I'm going to call this Main Mix. Now we want to create some groups here. There's a master group already. I'm going to create a new group, and I'm going to call it Sound Effects. And I want to go back to master and click plus again, because if I'm here when I click plus, it's going to create it under here, which is not a big deal because I can move it. But there's combat music, which I will drag up to master. And then I'll just click this one and say patrol music. So now we've got 3 music groups. So under master, we've got combat music, sound effects, and patrol music. These are basically destinations for our audio sources to send sound to. Now we want to create a snapshot here. Actually, we're going to rename this one. I'm going to call this one Patrol Snapshot. Snap top. Let me rename that again. Snapshot. There, I can type. And this is the default or start snapshot. Let's create another one. And we will call this Combat Snapshot. So in this snapshot, we want the combat music to be about -5. We want sound effects to be about -10. And that's good enough. And then we want patrol music to be 0. Actually, this is backwards. I want patrol music to be about -5 and combat music to be 0. On the combat snapshot, that's the one we want this to be -5, give or take -10, and 0. So we transition between patrol and combat. We'll get a nice crossfade between these volume levels. We come up to our Music Manager. We can now add a couple of audio sources. Audio source. Okay. And this one's going to go to patrol. It will not play on awake, but it will loop. And then we will add another one. This one will go to the combat group. It will not play on awake, but it will loop. All right, so now we want to add the snapshots here to our serialized field. So the patrol snapshot will go in there, and the combat snapshot will go in there. And the only thing missing is to populate our audio sources here, and then our audio clips. So for the audio clips, I'm going to go up to our project folder. I'm going to create a new subfolder, and I'm going to call it audio. Go in here. Now, I'm using audio that I got from itch.io and from the Unity Asset Store, some free ones. So under itch, you can come up here and say browse assets. You can filter by music, filter by free. And I found this Space Ultimate Mega Pack. I mean, look at this. Ultimate Space Game Mega Pack. If you go to its website, this thing has got, it's got sprites, it's got sound effects. It's just got a ton of stuff in it. So you can download this for free. You just click download, and then you can name your own price, but you can say you don't want to pay anything. You can donate to them if you want to support them. That's totally up to you. But I've already downloaded that, and there's a few sounds that I've already decided that I want to use from that pack. I've also gone up to the Unity Asset Store, and I found this free laser weapons. So it's another free asset, and it's got some pretty decent laser firing sounds. So if you don't already own this asset, go to the Unity Asset Store, add it to your asset. So if I was signed in, it would show that it's in my assets. And then come back into the Unity editor, open Window, Package Manager, and then under My Assets, type Free Laser, and there is your free laser weapons. Download it, and then once you've downloaded it, click Import, and let Unity do its thing. All right. We don't need all of these, but I'm just going to go ahead and import them all anyway. And they'll be in the GitHub repo. So I would say import. Okay, so Unity imported all of them, and it put it under Asset Store package. Actually, it put it down here under Laser Weapon Sound. What I'm going to do, I'm going to minimize all these. And I'm going to drag that whole folder into the audio folder. And the reason I'm doing that is because this way it'll be in the GitHub repo when I commit this to GitHub. If it's outside, if it's in this folder or outside here, Git is going to ignore it. So we're going to use this sound. And I think we're going to use this sound. So this one will be for shooting the blaster, and this one will be for launching the missiles. We still need to add audio clips for the music, and also for the weapon impacts. So the other assets are going to be coming from this one that I got from itch.io, and I've already downloaded this, so you don't have to watch me do that. We're going to go back into the Unity editor, into our audio folder. And I've got these open in a browser window. So one of the folders that comes in that asset pack is a bunch of free music. So let me just show you this zip file. This is all the stuff that comes in that file that we got from that itch.io package. So you can see there's a ton of stuff in here. And under sound effects and music, audio, there's this folder here called Simple Music. And I'm going to use these deep space clips and these dynamic fight clips for our patrol music and combat music. So in order to do this, I need to come here and say Show in Explorer, because for some reason, you can't drag and drop from a zip file directly into Unity, but you can drag and drop from a zip file directly into Windows Explorer. So I'm just going to take I'm going to take this whole Simple Music folder, and I'm just going to copy it into here. And then if we go back into Unity, you'll see that Unity will pick them up and import them. And here we go. All right, click out of that so it stops previewing. All right, so now that we've got those, what we can do is we can go up to our Music Manager. In here where we've got patrol music, we can drag in deep space A and deep space B. And actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a little trick here, right click, properties, and that way I can select all three of these and drag them right into combat music. And it dragged all three at once. Okay, so we've got our music effects and set up in the Music Manager, and all we need now is for the Game Manager to tell it when to play that music. And that's actually going to have to come from our radar screen, because the radar screen is what determines whether or not there are enemies within scanning range. So I guess we can go ahead and do that. If we go to our player ship and here in the radar screen, expand that and open that up, we can go ahead and make the necessary changes to this to tell the Game Manager that we're in combat. So we'll add a couple of things to this function to be able to handle that. So we're going to have a integer property called targets in range, and that is going to be an expression body method that's just going to return the length of our targets in range collection. So we already have our collection, which is our targets in range, and the radar screen is already populating that. So all we want to do is return this number of items in it as this targets in range property. And then we're going to have a Boolean property called in combat. And where we're going to use that is in late update. So down here, right now, we're drawing our target blips, and then we're updating the target indicators in the UI Manager. Well, what we're going to do down here is we're going to say if targets in range is greater than 0, then if we're already in combat, let's just return. We're not going to do anything because we're already in combat. Otherwise, we're going to set in combat to be true. And then we're going to tell the Game Manager, and this is why we added the singleton pattern to the Game Manager, in combat is true. And then Game Manager, if you remember, is going to tell the Music Manager, play combat music. And then we're just going to return out of here. So now, if there aren't any targets in range, we're going to check and see if we're not in combat. If we're not in combat, just return. We don't need to do anything. If we are in combat, we're going to set in combat to false. And we're going to tell Game Manager in combat is false. And that should get Game Manager playing music either combat music or patrol music, depending on whether or not there are enemies in scanning range. And we can test this real quick. If we come back here into the Unity editor, and let's get rid of all of our enemies except one. We'll get rid of these targets. We'll get rid of these enemy fighters. So we only have one enemy here. I want to make sure I apply any changes that we've made to his prefab in the past. And we're going to start playing. We should get combat music right away because he's in scanning range. If we blow him up, it should switch over to patrol music. And I'm going to change this from maximize to interplay mode normally. And the reason I'm doing that is so I can see our audio mixer down here. I'll minimize that window a little bit, give me a little bit more room here. Hit play. And we got combat music. We blew him up. And now we have patrol music. Just like that, it's magic. So let's do a little work on the SoundManager. So we need to add our SoundManager script. And we'll zoom in. Get rid of our boilerplate. And we're going to add the audio namespace. And as usual, we're going to implement the singleton pattern, public static SoundManager instance awake if instance is not equal to null and instance is not equal to this. Destroy game object, return instance equals this. Now we're going to add some other things here. We're going to come up to the top of our class and we're going to add an attribute called require component type of audio source. And this will automatically add an audio source to this component. And then we're going to add a variable for that audio source. And in awake, after this, we're going to say audio source equals get component audio source. So now we've got an audio source. And we're going to add a public method, which we may want to use just to play one-off sound clips. We'll call it play clip. It will take an audio clip parameter called clip. It'll take a floating point called volume, and we'll give it a default value of 1, which is full volume. So if we don't specify this parameter, it will have a value of 1. That's an optional parameter. So audio source dot play one shot clip volume. Easy peasy. All right. Now I want to add another method here, a public static method. We're going to use this to configure the audio sources for all the different components that want to play audio in 3D spatial in a 3D spatial field. So, for instance, if an enemy ship is shooting its lasers, we want the sound to come from the enemy ship. So it'll be kind of like a surround sound thing, where if it's off to our right a little bit, we'll hear it off to our right. And then the farther away it is, the fainter it will be, and the closer it is, the louder it will be. So we want the audio source for that blaster to be configured for spatial sound. So what we're going to do is we're going to say public static audio source configure audio source. Actually, I'm going to call that configure 3D audio source. And we'll take an audio source parameter. And we're going to set the spatialize property to be true. We're going to set the spatial blend to be 100%. We're going to set the roll-off mode to be linear. We're going to set the max distance to to be, I don't know, 500. We want to set its output to be a sound effects group. So I think I want to add a serialized field. Audio mixer group. And I'm going to call that sound effects group. So you remember in our audio mixer we had 3 groups. We had sound effects, combat music, and patrol music. Get rid of that. So down here, we're going to say audio source dot output audio mixer group equals instance, because this is a static method, so we have to access this through the instance. Instance dot sound effects group. And then we're going to return this audio source. And so the way this is going to work, let's go out here and we'll go to the blaster prefab. So under prefabs, weapons, we got blaster here. Let's open up this script. We're going to add a require attribute, a require component type of audio source. We're going to add an audio source variable. And then we're going to add an awake method. And we're going to say audio source equals SoundManager dot instance dot configure, or we don't want instance, SoundManager dot configure 3D audio source. And then we're going to get component audio source. So this is going to get our audio source, which is going to be created automatically because of this required component. It's going to get our audio source, pass it in the configure 3D audio source, and get it back with all those fields set so that we have 3D spatial sound. And then we want to add a serialized field for our fire sound. So come in here and say serialized field, audio clip, fire sound. And then down here where we fire our projectile, we'll say if fire sound, audio source, play one shot, fire sound. And that should, whenever we fire, play that laser sound. So now we got to go up to our prefab and double click that, and you see under here, ooh, we never assigned our weak. Let's do that real quick. Weak player projectile. Okay, so fire sound. We go to audio free, and I think we said light blast 5. And you see it already added our audio source for us. We don't want play on awake. I should have turned that off. It doesn't matter because it doesn't have its own audio clip. And it's going to assign all this stuff for us, but this is going to go to the sound effects group. And right now it doesn't have spatial blend turned on. All that stuff is off. None of these things are really set correctly, but that doesn't matter. It's going to do that for us. Let's just go ahead and hit play and then shoot our blasters and see what happens. Our sound effects are not playing. You know, I think that the player ship is not picking it up from the prefab. So it's not. So let me go ahead and drag that in here. That's interesting. Okay, hit play again. So I couldn't tell if we were on the patrol snapshot and if it was playing on the sound effects. It should be in the combat snapshot. But it's not sending it to the combat group. Looks like it's just playing on the master group. If we go up to our sound manager, we didn't ever assign this, it looks like. So we need to set sound effects here. Let's try it now. There we go. So it's not nearly as loud because I had pulled it down to about -10 dB. All right. So we've got our blaster sound effects playing correctly. I want to go ahead and apply these changes to the prefab. And we're going to want to do similar things to the MissileLauncher prefab. Now, we don't have a prefab for the MissileLauncher, but we do have the script attached to the launchers on the ship here. So let's double click that. And we're going to add our require component type of audio source. And we're going to add a serialized field, audio clip, fire, I'm going to call it launch sound. We're going to add an audio source variable. And do we already have an awake method? We do. So down in here, we're going to say audio source equals SoundManager. Configure 3D audio source, get component audio source. And then down here where we fire our missile, we'll say if launch sound audio source play one shot launch sound. And we'll go back into the Unity editor. We'll pick both of those guys, and now we need to give it the launch sound, and so we'll go into our laser weapon sounds free under our audio folder, and we want it heavy blast 13. So let's hit play and launch some missiles. And it works. For the weapon impact sounds, I'm going to use some clips again from that pack that we got from itch.io. So again, if we go into that zip file and we browse into the, I'm going to go back here. So you have the zip file, sound effects, plus music audio. Under here, this SFX package, Space Robotic Futuristic. And I want to use a couple of these build sounds. I think it was build 5 and build 11. So come up here to audio, and I'm just going to put them right in audio. So once again, though, as I mentioned before, you can't copy from a zip file directly into Unity. So we're going to have to go into the Explorer here. So I'll drag and copy that. And I'll drag and copy that. So now if we go into Unity and go into the audio folder, so this will be for the projectile impact, and this will be for the missile impact. All right, so what I want to do is we're going to go into our prefab for the weapons. We're going to go into the player projectile, and we're going to open the projectile script, and we're going to do the same thing we did for the launchers and for the blaster. We're going to add the require component, type of audio source. We're going to add a variable for the audio source. And if I can type, boy, I'm just doing a terrible job typing for you all today. In the awake method, audio source equals SoundManager.configure. Say get component audio source. And we're going to want a serialized field. Get rid of this private keyword. Audio clip and impact sound. Yeah, I don't guess we need a space there. So now when it collides with something, we're going to say if impact sound audio source play one shot impact sound. So then we'll go into our prefab for the projectile. There we go. And down here, we need our audio clip. So we'll go back up to the audio folder and build 5. There we go. And we're going to want to do the same thing. Well, let's go to the prefab for the weak player projectile. Yeah, we want to do the same thing there. Build 5. And we're going to do the same thing for the missiles. So go back into the prefabs for the weapons, pick missile, double click here to open up the script. Serialize field. No, I don't want serialize field. I want require component. Type of audio source. Audio source. Audio source. Here we want the serialized field. Audio clip. Impact sound. And in the awake method, audio source equals SoundManager. Configure 3D audio source. Get component. Audio source. And then when we collide with something, if impact sound play, audio source play, one shot, impact sound. Go back into the Unity editor and go to the prefab for the weapons. Select missile, and right here for impact sound, we'll take build 11. And save. That should take care of that. Now we do need to create variants of these for the enemy. If we want the enemy to shoot back, the enemy needs to have weapons that it can shoot back at us. So under our prefabs here, I'm going to drag player projectile, weak player projectile, and missile into the scene. And we're going to rename this enemy projectile. Going to rename this one weak enemy projectile, and rename this one enemy missile. Okay, now we'll go ahead and drag these in here as prefab variants, and then I will delete them from the scene. So let's look at the enemy projectile first. I'm going to rename these. I just want that to say enemy missile. It doesn't need to say variant. Same with this. Same with this. And so if you look at our missile, it is on the player projectile layer. We want the enemy missile to be on the enemy projectile layer. Same thing for the enemy projectile and the weak enemy projectile. And I could make them look different too by changing their colors. I think I want to do that. So we'll look at the enemy projectile here, open up the prefab. The trail renderer color can be changed. So let's make it kind of an orange. Something like that. And then let's go into the capsule. The capsule actually has a material. So we're going to go into this materials folder, weapons, player projectile, and weak player projectile materials should be under the weapons folder. All right, so we'll take this and we will duplicate it. And we will rename it Enemy, oops, got my caps lock on, Enemy Projectile. And then we'll duplicate this one. Weak Enemy Projectile. Okay, so we're going to change their colors. So I want this to be kind of a reddish orange. All right. And then for the emission, something kind of like that, I think, might look nice. And then for the point light, something like that. And now let's look at the weak enemy projectile. It's going to be a darker orange, something like that. Go into the capsule. Oh, what am I doing here? I don't want it to be in there. I want to be in here. Yeah, so that's all I need for that. So I need to go back up to here into the capsule. For the material here, I'll use enemy projectile. And then point light's fine. Okay. Let's go back to the prefab weapons and weak enemy projectile capsule. So that's using weak player projectile. We want weak enemy projectile. Why wouldn't it let me take that? Oh, duh. Go up here to materials, weapons, weak enemy projectile. And look at the point light. We want that to be like that. And for the trail renderer, I don't know why I have two things there. Can I delete one? Yes. All right, so for this one, kind of a dark color there. Something like that. I just want them to look a little bit different than the player's projectiles. So now we go back in here to the prefabs. I just want to double check. So enemy projectile, it's got that trail renderer. The capsule's got that material. The point light is that color. Weak enemy projectile. All right, I think we're good to go on those. One other thing, the player ship, I need to add a tag here, player. We're going to be using that later. Okay, we're going to eventually add a shield to the player too, but I'm not going to worry about that just yet. And I will delete these from the scene. Well, let me make sure I override these. Nothing to override. Nothing to over. Okay, I will delete that, and I will delete that. All right. So now we need to make sure these have the right sounds on them. There's no audio clip on that. So we'll go to build 5 and do the same thing for weak enemy projectile. Oh, that's already got that. That one needs it. Somehow I overlooked that. All right, so player projectile has that. Weak player projectile, enemy projectile, weak enemy projectile. Now missile should have build 11. So enemy missile has build 11. Okay, so they should all be ready to go. So the enemy fighter currently has no way to shoot at us. If you look at his blasters, they don't have any projectiles assigned to them, and his launchers don't even have the missile launcher script on them. So let's go ahead and add that real quick. All right. So let's do the blasters first. We want to add the projectiles and the fire sound. So we go up here. We want enemy projectile, weak enemy projectile, and then the fire sound was under lasers, free, and it was light blast 5, I believe. Yeah. Okay, so that's good. So those should both be ready to go. Now we go to big launcher. Go down to our weapon prefabs. So for the missile prefab, we'll use, we want enemy missile. And then for the launch sound, it was heavy blast 11, I believe. Nope. 13? Yeah, it was 13. So we'll go back into here and heavy blast 13. We also only want the enemy ship to get 2 missiles with 1 set of reloads, a cooldown time of 10, and a reload time of 30. Let's look at his blasters. That's actually all done by the ship data. So let's go up to our data here. We currently only have an escort fighter, and those are the settings for the escort fighter. I'm going to want to nerf the enemy fighter a little bit because there's going to be waves of them. So I don't want them to be quite as tough as the player ship. So we're going to come up to our data folder here. We're going to go up to Assets, Create, 3D Space Shooter, Ship Data. And that creates that. And we're going to call this EnemyFighter. Let's reduce his thrust to about 7,000. So he's not quite as fast as the player ship. Pitch force, that seems really high. I'll lower that down. Roll force is probably fine, but I don't want him to be able to turn quite as quickly. Shield strength 1,000. Shield regeneration is fine. Max health 1,000. Blaster damage 100. Blaster force, make them not as powerful or as fast as ours. Cooldown, make them only be able to fire once a second. Let their projectiles last longer. All right, so now if we go up to the enemy fighter, we're going to change this. Right now, the enemy fighter is using the same ship controller that the player ship is using. I want to create a derived class from this called EnemyShipController, and it's going to do some things specific to the enemy-controlled ship. So I think that's what I'm going to want to tackle next. Before we can create the enemy ship controller, we're going to have to modify our ship controller a little bit so that we can derive from it. Let me see, what do I want to add here? So for one thing, we're going to want to have a collection of missile launchers the same way we do for our blasters. And the reason we want to do this is because our missile launchers are going to have a we need to have the ability to assign a target to the missile launchers. And we also need them to use the AIShipWeaponControls to tell them when to fire. Right now, if you remember when I did a quick and dirty to get the missile launchers going, and they're just looking for the left mouse button press to see if they should fire. That's going to have to change. But I also need to make this protected. So protected variables can be referenced by derived classes. Private ones cannot. And if you don't put in a qualifier here, an access specifier like protected or public or private, by default, it's private. And we also want our movement controls to be protected. And we've got our missile launchers here, okay. What else do we want to do here? I think our damage handler needs to be protected, so the derived class can access it. And all that looks good. Okay, I think that's probably good for there. Now what I'm going to want to do in here, the same way we're initializing our blasters, we're going to want to initialize our missile launchers. We're going to have to add a method to our missile launcher to do this. So we're going to say launcher.init, which doesn't exist yet. And we're going to basically just pass in the weapon input. So this way, the desktop keyboard controls that we use for the player can be used to fire a missile, and the AIShipController will be able to initialize its missile launchers using the AIShipWeaponControls. Let's go ahead and hit Alt-Enter to create this function, and we'll go in here. And I guess we can go ahead and do this. It's going to be a very, very simple function. We're going to say weapon input equals weapon input. Of course, we don't have a weapon input variable just yet. So let's go up to the top of the function. In addition to our own transform, I know we're going to want a target transform. And let's down here say weapon controls weapon input. And then down here where we fire, instead of doing that, instead of checking specifically for the mouse input, we're going to say weapon input is secondary fired. True. Now, theoretically, I should still be able to fire my missiles. So let me go back into Unity and see if I broke anything. And apparently I did break something because I'm not able to fire my missiles. I know exactly what I broke. If I go into my player ship and I go to my missile launchers, actually if I go to my player ship and I look at the ship controller, we've got blasters, but we don't have any missile launchers. So I'm going to right click here, properties, and I'm going to scroll down to where I see my missile launchers. Then I can select both launchers, drag and drop right there. And now I actually have missile launchers assigned. There we go. I can fire my missiles. All right. Okay, so next, let's get back to refactoring our ship controller so that we can derive from it and create an enemy ship controller. So go back into player ship, ship controller. We want the derived class to be able to receive on enable and update events. So we're going to make this virtual. And actually, they need to be public virtual. Okay. So now the derived class will be able to receive on enable events, and they can pass them through back to this base class, but they can also do things specific to the derived class. And I think that's all we need to do in this base class. So let's go back into Unity. And down here in the ship controls folder under our scripts folder, we will right click, create C# script, EnemyShipController. And let's double click that. And zoom in, delete all this boilerplate. And what am I going to want for namespaces? We're not going to want either of these. I am going to want just plain system. And I'm going to want events. We're going to be using an event when the ship is destroyed. Let's see. I think that's good. Serialized fields. We're going to want a patrol range. So the ship is going to patrol in an area around the world origin out to 2,000 units. And then if a player ship comes within 1,000 units, we'll say that it's moved into attack range. And so we're going to basically create a very simple state machine so that the enemy ship can patrol, attack, reposition, retreat. Just a few very basic states for AI control of the ship. We're also going to want a layer mask, a couple of layer masks, I think. We're going to want a layer mask for our targets, and also one just specifically for the player. Because the enemy ship, if there's an asteroid in front, that can count as a target and they can shoot at it. And maybe even if there's a player missile, they can shoot our missiles. But I want to differentiate the targets from the player mask for relocation. I'm going to do a cast to see if it's about to collide with the player. And specifically, I want it to like juke to the side to avoid running into the player. So I wanted a separate layer mask for that. Let's define the different states for this ship. We're going to have an enemy ship state. We'll have a default state of none. We'll have a patrol state, an attack state, a reposition state, and a retreat state. If it's taking a certain amount of damage, I'm going to have it just get out of dodge. We're going to want our movement controls. We're going to want our weapon controls. We want to have a variable for our state, and we'll initialize that to none. We want to cache our transform. And I want to have a way to get the player ship. So we'll say game object, player ship. This is not the most efficient way to do this. And I may come back and refactor this later. But I'm just going to say get game object with tag player. That's why I had to put the player ship. I had to give it that player tag. And then we want to have a transform variable for the target. And that target could be the player. It could be a patrol point that we're navigating to, or a reposition point when we're juking. So that's basically what we're going to chase after. And it will change. Let's add a property with an expression body method. These are for debug purposes. In fact, I'm going to put these in a region. I'm going to say region public data for debugging. The state management can get a little wonky sometimes. It might not work right out of the box, and I might want to diagnose what's going on. So I'm going to expose some of the information publicly so I can display it in the UI if I need to. And also, I might want to later on expose this in the player's HUD. Like when he locks onto a ship, there might be some of this information that it might be cool to display in there. Let's see, I'm going to want the state. Expression body method state to string. The target name, which is just going to be the targets, if I have one. Name, otherwise none. I don't have a target. Distance to target. And this is going to be a little bit more complicated, so instead of doing an expression body method, I'll have a full-fledged getter. We'll default the distance to be empty string. And that's what we will return as our distance. Oops. Now, if we have a target, then distance I'm going to use string interpolation. And we're going to take a vector 3 distance, the target's position, minus our position. And I'm going to format that to 2 decimal places. All right, so that's distance to target. We want the health level. And I'll use string interpolation. And I'm going to take our, oops. Do I not have a damage handler? We should be getting that from the base class. All right, let me go into the base class, ShipManager, ShipController, find our damage handler. It is protected. I should be able to access this from the base class. Oh, I'm an idiot. All right, so this EnemyShipController is not supposed to derive from mono behavior. It's got to derive from ShipController. That will give us access. Let me do an in region while I'm at it. There. If you've never used regions before, it's a really cool way to be able to collapse whole big blocks of code in the editor. All right, so we're going to use our damage handler. There we go. We're going to want the health. And then we'll also show our max health. So, say we've taken 500 points of damage, it'll say 500 of 1,000. All right. What else do we want to return? We got our health. I think that's all we want for our debug, public debug data. So let's add our event. I'm actually going to add that above here. Public Unity event, it's going to return an integer as a parameter. We're going to call this ship destroyed, and I'm going to go ahead and instantiate it right here. Okay. Now I'm going to want to have several variables that I'm going to use to determine our state changes. I want to have a variable that says if we're in attack range. And this will be an expression body method. And I'm going to do a vector 3 distance. And we're going to take the player ship's transform position, our position, and we're going to say if it's less than the attack range that we specified in the editor. So we are in attack range if our distance from the player ship is less than, or let's make it less than or equal to the attack range. Okay, we're also going to want a variable to say, should we retreat? And this will be an expression body method. And all we're going to do is check our health. And if it's less than our max health times, I don't know, what, 30%, 33%, then we're going to want to get out of dodge and not take any more damage. If we're in the patrol state, I want to see if we've reached our patrol target. Reached patrol target. This will be an expression body method. We're going to do a vector 3 distance. So we're just going to look for our target position, our position. And if that is less than, I'm just going to use a small value like 0.15f. And if I've reached that, then what we're going to probably do, if we're still in a patrol state, is pick a new target within our patrol range. Should we be positioned? If we're in attack mode and we're closing in on the player ship and it looks like we're about to collide with the player ship, then what we're going to want to do is veer off either up, down, left, or right randomly. But first we need to know, should we reposition? So once again, an expression body method. And I'm going to do a sphere cast. It's easy for you to say. My tongue got wrapped around my eye teeth and I couldn't see what I was saying. Let's see, transform position. So we're going to cast it from our position to a range of 3, actually a radius of 3, forward, in the forward direction. Let me put us on a new line. And to a max distance of 100 using the player mask. So basically, if we cast a ray out in front of us with a radius of 3 units out to a distance of 100, if we hit something in our player mask, we want to reposition. And finally, I'm going to add a public float that I'm going to use outside of this class later on. Now is where we're going to override the base class methods that we want to call. So we're going to have an override on enable. So there we can call the base class. But before we call the base class, we're going to cache our transform here. We're going to get our AI ship movement controls. We're going to cast them. Oops. Movement controls. Okay. We're also going to get our weapon controls. Again, doing a cast. And we're going to want to set our state to be patrol. We haven't written a set state function yet, so we're going to have to do that. And because we didn't have one, it thought I meant set state graph. And then we'll call the base class. So let's go ahead and stub this out. Did I define a variable for our state? I did. So one thing I want to do in here is I want to say if our state hasn't changed, if we're not changing the state, then just return. We don't need to do anything. Otherwise, I'm going to set state to equal state. And I'm going to do some other stuff in here. Okay, that's weird. What else do we want to do? We want to have an on disable. And we want to call that ship destroyed method. And we want to get our instance ID. Okay. So we're going to have an EnemyShipManager that spawns the enemy ships. And it's going to have a collection of enemy ships. And so we need to have a way for it to know that, hey, we've been destroyed, remove us from your collection. And so that's what this ship destroyed is going to do. Because you remember, our damage handler is only disabling, actually the ShipController base class is only disabling us when we're destroyed. It's not destroying us. And so when we are disabled, we know we're being destroyed, so we can invoke this event. And we're going to override our update method. And again, we call the base class at the end of this. But before we do that, we want to, basically, this is our state machine loop. So we're going to have our enemy ship state. We're going to say get next state. And I need to create that method. And then we're going to set state to that state. And I don't need these to be two separate calls. I could have just said set state, get next state. But if I want to, for debugging purposes, I might want to be able to put a breakpoint here and step over this. Okay, so get next state. This is going to be a lot of our game loop. And we're going to use a C8, C#8 syntax switch statement. So this is new to C#8. So if you're using an older version of Unity, you're going to have to use an old classic switch statement instead of this, but you should be able to see how that would work. So enemy ship state, new state is going to equal our current state switch. We're going to return that new state. And so now, if we are in patrol, then we're going to call a function called patrol. And that function is going to return our next state. So let me go ahead and stub out all these functions here. We're going to have enemy ship state patrol. And let's just, for now, return patrol. We're going to have enemy ship state attack. And for now, let's just have it return attack. Enemy ship state reposition. And retreat. All right. So this switch statement in our get next state is going to just, based on our current state, we're either going to call patrol, attack, reposition, or retreat. And then that's going to return our next state. So the next time through this loop, we'll do that state's activity. So we have attack. We have, oops, not attach, attack. Okay. We have reposition. We have retreat. And then C# likes you to handle the edge case where it's not any of those values, in which case I'm just going to assign it to none. Let's see. There. All right. So what are we going to do in these different functions? So in every single one of these, we're going to execute this line. We're going to say if should retreat, then we want to return retreat. That's going to be our new state. And I'm just going to copy and paste that into all of those. All right. All right, so we're also going to want to see, in this case, if we're in patrol, we want to see if we're in attack range. If we're in attack range, then we're going to set our state to attack. Otherwise, so we're in patrol, we want to see, did we reach our patrol target? And if we did, we're going to reset our target's position to be a random inside unit sphere times patrol range. Okay. All right, and we're already going to then return patrol. So I think that's it for patrol. So the patrol state's real simple. We're just going from one point to another until we see an enemy ship, a player ship, in which case we're going to attack it. Otherwise, if we've taken a bunch of damage, we're going to retreat. So it's pretty simple. The attack is actually even simpler. So we already checked to see if we should retreat. The only other thing we're going to do is see if we should reposition. So should reposition then we're going to return reposition. Otherwise, we're going to stay in the attack state. And you're like, but Greg, we're not firing any weapons. That's going to be handled by the AI weapon controller. The AI weapon controller is going to determine whether or not we're firing blasters or missiles. This EnemyShipController is just really concerned with our state. All right, so reposition. If we should retreat, we'll retreat. Otherwise, we're going to use a ternary operator here. We're going to say return vector 3 distance, target position, transform position. If it's less than 100, and I'll explain what this is doing in a minute, we're going to switch to attack. Otherwise, we're going to continue in our reposition state. So when we're repositioning, we basically pick a reposition target that's within, I think, 500 or so, maybe 250. I forget. We pick some spot either up, down, left, or right of us, a certain distance away. And so we're navigating toward that. So we're going to juke left, right, up, or down. When we get within 100 units of that, I want to switch back to attack. And the reason I want to do that is because if I go all the way to that target, the ship's going to slow down because of the PID controller that we have controlling the thrust. And it's going to look really weird if he just slows down and then turns around and starts coming after us again. So for a smooth, fluid motion, I want to get within 100 units of that and switch back to attack right away. Retreat. This is silly. I'm already retreating. All I need to do is return retreat. We're going to stay in the retreat forever unless we get blown up. All right. We might want to actually check to see if we reached our retreat target and then destroy the ship, maybe. But I'm not going to worry about that just yet. Okay. The big function in this class is the set state. So we check to see if we're not really changing state, in which case we return. Otherwise, we're going to assign this to our state. And now we're going to do a switch on our state. And we're going to handle these different states. So patrol, attack, reposition, retreat. So this is a classic switch statement. I can't use the new syntax for this because these are more complex things that are being done inside these blocks. So first of all, if we're in patrol, then we should have a patrol target. If we don't, we need to create one. So the target is going to be a new game object. I'm going to call this patrol target, and we're going to get its transform, and we're going to assign that to our target variable. We're going to get its position, and that's going to be random inside unit sphere times patrol range. We're going to set that on our AIShipWeaponControls. And it looks like I'm going to need to add this method. And then we're also going to create a function called setWeaponsTarget. So let's come down here and void setWeaponsTarget. We're going to take our target parameter, our attack range, and a target mask. And we're going to iterate through our missile launchers. And I'm going to have to create that function too. So we're going to have to be creating a lot of functions here. Let's start with the AIShipWeaponControls. So this is going to be very simple. Target equals target. So currently, the MissileLauncher, I think we were just assigning this in the inspector. Yeah, so we were, for our testing purposes, just assigning a target to the AIShipControls in the inspector. Now we're going to actually have the EnemyShipController assign it. And so that will make sure that we're chasing our target. Simple. And we'll come down to these later. Let's do the next case. So let's scroll up here and do the attack. So if we have a target, and that target, by the way, is not an enemy, or it's not the player ship, that is either a repositioned target or a patrol target. So we want to destroy that. And then we want to assign the player ship's transform as our target. And we're going to set that on our AIShipWeaponControls, and we're going to pass that in our setWeaponsTarget function. Okay, so that'll make sure that we are chasing and attacking the player ship. Okay, let's handle the reposition case. I'm going to create a new function. We're going to do an assignment here and pass in the result of that. And the result is going to be get reposition target. And I will create that function. And this is going to seem a little more complicated than it really is. We're going to create a new game object. And we're going to call it reposition target. And by the way, the reason I'm doing this and giving them these names is so we can look at them in the inspector and see immediately what they are. We're going to get a random direction to reposition to from 1 to 4. And now we're going to cache a couple of variables from our transform for performance reasons. And we're going to do a switch here. We're going to say direction equals, and we're going to switch on that random number that we generated. If it's 1, we're going to go right. If it's 2, we're going to go left, which is right times -1. If it's 3, we're going to go up. And if it's 4, we're going to go up times -1, which is down. Otherwise, we're going to go backwards. So if it's anything other than those, and this should never happen because we're getting a random number from 1 to 4, but C# will yell at me if I don't handle this outside that case, the default case. So we're going to say transform forward times -1. But again, that should never happen. So the target's position is going to be our transform position plus that direction, and we're going to go out 250 units. And we're really only going to go out 150 units because when we get within 100 of it, we're going to switch back to attack. Let's return that target. So we're going to set our AI movement controls to go to that target. And then we're going to want to null out our weapons. So we're going to say set weapons target null 0, 0. And I'm going to copy this because we also want to do that when we're retreating. So let's get a retreat target. Let's say AI ship movement control set target equals get retreat target. Create method. This one will be a bit simpler. Direction will be, we're going to go the opposite way of the player ship. So the player ship's position minus our position, that's the direction to the player ship. So target equals new game object, retreat target dot transform. Its position will be direction times negative 5,000. All right. I think that handles all of our state machine. So now we need to create these functions on our MissileLauncher and on our ship weapon controls. Let's do this one first. Okay, so right now, our AIShipWeaponControls is always returning false for primary fired and secondary fires. This is blasters, this is missiles. So we're going to want to handle that. So let's add a couple of variables here, booleans. We'll have fire primary, fire secondary, and this is going to return fire primary, fire secondary. All right. So now we need to assign those variables. We're going to want some other variables in here. Let's do our transform. We'll cache that as usual. We're also going to want a target. We want our attack range, a layer mask, let's go ahead and add an awake method and cache our transform. We're going to want an update method. And we're going to create a couple of Boolean properties or functions to tell us whether or not we can fire these weapons. So we'll say fire primary equals can fire primary. And fire secondary equals can fire secondary. I will create that function. And I will create that function. We're also going to want to have a public method. We got SetTarget here. So in here, we're going to say target equals target. Attack range equals attack range. Layer mask equals target mask. Okay, so let's handle these functions here. Can fire primary. So we're going to say we have a target. I'm going to break this out. I'm going to say if not target, return false. And then we're going to just do a raycast. Return physics.raycast from our position forward out to our attack range. But for blasters, I only want to use half our attack range. Now, it's always good practice to multiply instead of divide for speed. So I could have done divided by 2, but it's faster to do times 0.5. And then we will use our layer mask. So if we hit something from our layer mask out in front of us, out to a distance of our attack range divided by 2, then we can fire our primary weapon. I'm probably going to do some refactoring of this later. I want to add some aim assist to the fighter because right now he's going to be firing his projectiles straight out, and only if going straight out he can hit me. It's going to be really hard for the enemy ship to hit me with blasters because those are just straight ballistic projectiles. So I might want to make my target be to be forward of my current position based on my velocity. So he's kind of leading me. Okay. That's good for can fire primary. Let's do secondary. Once again, if not target, return false. And we also want to return false if we can't hit it with a sphere cast. So physics.spherecast from our position, radius of 3 in the forward direction, out to our attack range using our layer mask, return false. Okay. Finally, we want to see if we're going roughly the same direction. So we'll say return target dot transform dot forward minus our transform dot forward dot magnitude is less than 0.5. Okay. Cool. Let's go back into our EnemyShipController. So now we need to handle the MissileLauncher. So this will be very, very simple. Target equals SetTarget. Now, not SetTarget, target equals target. So we're currently initializing our missile with the target that we got from the radar screen. This only worked for the player ship. The AI controlled ship is now going to use this target. So if we have a target, we're going to use that. Otherwise, we're going to use the radar screen's locked on target. So this is a ternary operator. We're saying if this, then this, else that. So if we have a target, then use the target, else use the radar screen's locked on target. So that should handle the computer control being able to launch missiles. Let's go back into Unity. Now we're going to want to change our enemy ship to use that new EnemyShipController. So I've made lots of changes to this guy that I want to go ahead and apply. So right here we have a ship controller and we have all these things here. Let's add a component, EnemyShipController, and let's go ahead and start filling some of these things in. I'm going to move this up. Oh, it wants me to open the prefab. Yeah, let's do it from the prefab. So let me go ahead and remove this. And we're going to go into the prefab ships, enemy ship, add component, EnemyShipController. I'm going to drag this up just so I can have these closer together so I can reference. So we need a shield. So let's go down to our shield. We need AIShipWeaponControls and AIShipWeaponControls. We need the ship data. Now currently I did create that EnemyFighter ship data, so that should give us everything we need there. Now we need both our engines. So I'm going to do our little trick here where I'll right click properties so that I can select my engines without the inspector changing, because the inspector over here will change. If I come over here and click engine, this changes to engine, but I still have my properties window. So I'm going to grab both engines and I'm going to drag them onto my engines collection. I'm going to grab both blasters and I'm going to drag them onto the blasters collection. And I'm going to grab both of our launchers and I'm going to drag them onto the missile launchers. Okay, do we need anything else? There's no cockpit animation controls. We got our patrol range, attack range. We need our target mask. What do I want to use for the target mask? I think I want to use the player for sure. And maybe player projectile, player shield, and asteroids. Actually, not player project. Well, yeah, I guess the missile is a projectile. I probably should have a separate layer for the missiles than I do for the regular projectiles, but I'm going to go ahead and leave that. And then for the player mask, it's just going to be the player. Or the player shield. All right. Is there anything else that I need in here? I don't think so. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this guy from the scene. And I'm going to just disable this target in case I want to use it in the future. And we need to go into our EnemyShipManager. And we actually need to start spawning enemy ships. So first, our serialized fields. And if you're wondering, this is not going to implement the singleton pattern. It doesn't need to. Let's see. So serialized field, game object. We want to have an array of game objects. And these are going to be our enemy ship enemy ship prefabs. We currently only have one, but we're going to have different classes of enemy ships. Let's see, we want to have a max number of enemies that can be on the board at any one time, and we're going to start that out at, let's start it out with 1, and I'm going to increment that as we kill enemies. Make it get tougher and tougher. Serialized field, spawn interval. Let's set that to be 30 seconds. Have another serialized field. And this is going to be the range at which it will spawn the ships. I think I'm going to have a first spawn interval. And I'm going to set that to 10 seconds. So the very first one will spawn in 10 seconds. And then after that, it will be 30 seconds between new ones being spawned. This will give the player 10 seconds to fly around before any enemies show up. All right, let's create some private variables here. We're going to have a collection of game objects that are going to be our enemy ships. And we will add our missing reference, which is system collections generic. We're going to have a variable for our spawn delay. We want to cache our transform as per usual. And let's create a property for max enemies. Since this is going to start out with an initial value from here, but then we're going to increment it later on. And the same thing with our spawn interval. We'll have a separate property for that. And I want to return the number of active enemies. So I'm actually going to use a link statement. So I'm going to add using system.link lat language. Okay. So the statement's going to be enemy ships dot count, and this is going to be the link lambda expression. We're going to say for each enemy that is active. So it's just going to give me the number of enemies that are active. And let's have a Boolean. Can spawn enemy ship. Let's decrement our spawn delay by time.delta_time. Interesting. Man, I cannot type this correctly. Time.delta_time. And then we're just going to return our spawn delay is less than or equal to 0. And the number of active enemies is less than our max enemies. Then we can spawn an enemy ship. I want to have a variable to give me a random prefab from our array of prefabs. And this will be an expression body method. I'm going to take our enemy ship prefabs, and I'm just going to take a random one from 0 to its length. I don't know why it always wants to default to the system random. I want to use the Unity random. Okay. Let's start getting into some of the Unity callback functions. Awake. Let's cache our transform. Let's set our max enemies to be whatever was specified in the inspector. And that needs to be an assignment. And let's set our spawn interval to be first spawn interval. And on enable, we are going to initialize our collection of enemy ships. And we're going to set our spawn delay to be the spawn interval. Actually, I want this to be spawn interval. I want this one, when we're first enabled, to be the first spawn interval. Yeah, I think that's what I want to do. Okay, in the update method, if can spawn enemy ship, spawn enemy ship. We will create that method. Okay. So our spawn position is going to be random inside unit sphere times random range, our minimum spawn range, and our maximum spawn range. All right. So now let's instantiate an enemy using a random prefab, and we're going to parent it to us. It's going to be our child. We are the EnemyShipManager, and we manage the enemy ships. Let's get the EnemyShipController and add a listener to its on-ship destroyed. So we'll say enemy get component EnemyShipController. We'll say ship destroyed, add listener, on ship destroyed. And it will create that function. and that will be ID. All right, so we have a listener for that. Let's add that to our collection of enemy ships. Let's set its position. To be the spawn position. And now we'll reset our spawn delay to be the spawn interval. All right, so now on ship destroyed, we're going to go through our collection of enemy ships, find the one with this ID, and we're going to remove it from our collection, and we are going to unsubscribe from its on ship destroyed event handler, and we are going to destroy it. So we're going to get the ship at, actually I think we want a for loop here. Let's do a for var I equals 0, I is less than enemy ships.count. And then we're going to get the ship at that position. And if the instance ID of that ship is not equal to the ID that we're looking for, we'll continue and get the next one. Otherwise, we're going to remove that ship from our collection. We're going to get the enemy ship controllers from there. Enemy ship controller, ship destroyed, remove listener on ship destroyed. And we're going to destroy the game object and return. All right. I think that is good. The only other thing we want to do is whenever we destroy a ship, I'm trying to think about when I should increment the number of max ships and decrease the spawn interval. I'm going to go ahead and just increment that here. I'm going to say max enemies. I have to put it in front. I'm going to go ahead and increment it there. Every time. And I may start decreasing the spawn interval over time too. But for now, let's just go with that. So we've got our EnemyShipManager. We don't currently have any enemy ship prefabs. So let's just drag that in there. Max enemies, first spawn interval, minimum spawn range, maximum spawn range. I'm going to give this a test. I don't hear any music. I don't see any messages in the console either. One thing I want to do is on enable is tell the MusicManager to play patrol music. Because I did not hear any music, and I'm not sure why I didn't see any ships spawn. Oh, there's one. He's shooting at me. He's shooting at me. Woo! should not have killed him in one volley. I'm killing them with one volley, and I don't think that should happen. I might have to do some debugging for that in the next video. Alright, so we've got the basics of enemy AI ship control, enemy ship spawning, we've got music, we've got sound effects. I think that was really good progress for this video. So I think that about wraps it up for this video. If you found this video useful, and I hope you did, do me a favor and click that like and subscribe button. It really does help me to grow my channel. And as always, if you have any questions about anything I covered in this video or any suggestions about anything you'd like to see, drop a comment and I'll get back to them as soon as I possibly can. I monitor my comments and I'm always very quick to respond. So I want to thank you all so much for watching and good luck on your game development journey.